Hello and welcome to Back to School, a podcast where two highly opinionated design system consultants put aside their deep set assumptions to dive deep on design systems topics. Climb aboard the school bus for a field trip on the history, the lessons, and the people that really make a design system truly great. Now, I'm just going to say, I think that's probably the best intro that I've ever done. What do you think?
That was pretty spot on. I
It
think
was pretty spot on, wasn't it?
it was pretty spot on. I'm impressed with that. Sounds like
Not
you know what
pre.
you're Sounds like you know what you're talking about,
It
Amy.
does,
Do.
doesn't it? Yeah. For the listener, that was not pre-recorded. I did that live. So today we are talking all about naming things in design systems, a hot topic for sure. And very relieved to say that Geri is going to be driving the school bus today. So, Geri.
I've got to say, I have rather fallen down a rabbit hole of taxonomies and naming researching this episode. I started off thinking, the obvious thing, which is component names. But when you start
Mhm.
thinking through the end to end process of building a design system, there are so many naming decisions to make. And
Mm.
I imagine if you're new to design systems, it probably feels slightly overwhelming. So I will do my best to break it down logically, step by step.
I'm sure you'll do an excellent job of that, Geri. You're always very good at breaking things down step by step, unlike me, where
Thank
it's
you.
just a kind of cannon fire of chaos, and you've just got to hope
Wa-
that it all comes together in the end.
Wall of chaos. It always does come together. That's the very annoying thing about you.
Yeah.
So I think I suggested this topic because I am a massive word nerd and I like the idea of naming things. But why do you think naming is worth devoting a podcast episode to?
Honestly, Geri, I don't. I'm only joking. I love naming things. So, as a lot of you will know, I am a content designer. That's kind of my background. So, I'm always very interested in language and taxonomy and how we kind of organize and name things. I think naming is such an important part of establishing a kind of shared language around your design system. And, that's a huge part of making sure that people can kind of use it, understand it, engage with it, and feel part of it. So, for me, naming is a very important topic. And I'm not remotely surprised that you've got a podcast worth of content out of it and that you've fallen down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, naming is hard. This kind of comes from someone who had to name two children. My twins were born 3 months early, and for weeks they were called Twin 1 and Twin 2 on their little name
For
labels
weeks.
on their
Wow.
incubator, which was kind of like something out of Dr. Seuss. So having to come up
Goodness.
with four coherent names when you're sort of awash of hormones is just inhumane. But if
Four
you think,
coherent middle
well,
names
middle
too.
names, yeah, tough, but
What was your approach? How did you decide?
We decided on the most, I think mainly beforehand, that when we phoned my dad and told him the names, he said, "Oh, I don't like those." So yeah, if you've
Oh
got a very,
goodness.
very neurodiverse father, probably not worth running the names by. And if you think naming children and pets is hard, wait until you start naming things in design systems.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we're going back to school, we are dividing down our podcast into different subjects, and we're starting off as usual with a history lesson. The only thing I have to talk about here is the history of the actual name design systems. Having done some extensive research, i.e., asking ChatGPT, there doesn't seem to be one person who coined the term design systems, at least for digital. My question to you to kick off is, do you think design systems is a good name for what we do?
I think it's a good enough name. I think naming the things in design systems feels really important and worthy of lots of time and attention for me. Naming design systems themselves, I'm less bothered about. Like, I think, oh, sorry, as in the name design
The
system
name
as a
design
concept.
systems as yeah, for what we
Yeah.
do. Do you
I
think it's
just,
representative of what we do?
I think it's fine. Like, I've seen so many conversations about it on Twitter, X, excuse me, social media, and in real life, over the years, and I just get quite fatigued with it. I think it's fine. I've heard people say, "Oh, we should call it a product system, or we should call it a." Oh God, I can't remember some of the alternatives, but for me, it's just it's fine for what it is. We kind of know what it means now. I think it's taken on a life of its own. If we went back to the drawing board, then we might be able to come up with something more descriptive, but probably be longer, less easy to just throw around the way that we do with design systems. And we'd have to re-educate everybody, which is everyone's least favorite thing to do. She says on a podcast called Back to School.
The
hate
irony.
re-education. Hate it.
I think the name design system kind of sucks for what we do.
Okay.
I think it's a great name for some of the earliest examples of graphic design systems. Things like Massimo Vignelli's redesign of the New York subway signage. There's that amazing graphic standards manual, or the NASA graphic standards manual. The term design system sort of encapsulates this beautifully. It systemizes graphic design and gives design patterns and shapes meaning and purpose in a systemic way. But I just think for me, it's the word design. It just doesn't fully explain what we do.
No, that's interesting. And that's often the argument that I see being made. And I think part of that is whether you consider the actual implementation of the design part of the design itself, which I personally do. I think design without realization is not design, if that makes sense. It all gets very philosophical, doesn't it? But I do agree with you. I know I took quite a hard line there, unlike me. I do agree with you that we could probably come up with a better name. I just think it's sort of popularity now means I'd personally prefer to stick with what we have.
Yeah, I guess looking at the actual artifacts of the design system is one thing, but then looking at, everything else that goes with it, the whole joined up ecosystem of like support and guidance and the framework and shared language. I can think of much better names for our sort of, like interface libraries. I know, was it Co-op? They called their design system an experience library, which I quite liked because it went beyond just design. I don't know if I had to come up with a better name for design systems. I don't know if I've got one. Is there anything you would think of?
No, that's what I mean. I've never heard or thought of a kind of a clearer alternative. I do agree with you. I think that if we're just thinking about the kind of the documented parts of a design system or the actual artifacts that you can point at, there's probably better names. But I think the system part is really necessary for capturing some of those process and practice things that go around the artifacts.
The only problem is because history has left us with the legacy name design systems, it makes it almost impossible for you to explain to your elderly relatives at Christmas what you do.
It does.
When people ask you what a design system is, people outside product and tech, how do you usually explain it?
Interestingly, I tend to try and avoid the word design, try to avoid introducing them to the word design system. But I tend to say something like, how, you use a lot of different Amazon products, other e-commerce. What word am I looking for? Providers, not providers, services.
Websites?
Names are available. So you might use Amazon Prime, you might use Prime Video on your TV, you might use Amazon.co.uk, you might use Amazon.com. And Amazon wants all of its products to feel like Amazon and to work in a similar sort of way, so that when you're using them, you know where to look for certain commands and buttons and user journeys. And my job is about helping companies to establish that consistency in a way that means that if they've got 800 different teams working on their digital products, they can all kind of work in a similar way and follow similar standards and guidelines. That's how I tend to explain it.
That is an amazing description. Would you like to come to my next family Christmas and maybe do a presentation?
I've been waiting for such a long time for this invitation. So yeah, I can't believe you haven't asked me already, but yeah, my answer is yes.
Excellent. I'm glad we've agreed that. So we've decided design system is a okay name for what we do. It's what we've got. So I guess we just have to roll with it. So let's move down from the global name to your own name. As we're going back to school, I'm calling this section, It's the First Day of School. What's your name?
When you said your own name, I thought you meant Amy. I was like, oh, it means beloved in French.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My name Geraldine actually means mighty spearwoman, so I'm not
Is
sure what
it?
went wrong with that one. Yeah, it's a
That's it.
shocker.
I think that's a very apt name for you. I've always thought of you as a mighty spearwoman.
Oh, okay. First day of school, what's your name? Meaning, what is your design system name, Amy? Because this is a podcast about design systems.
Keep forgetting.
Okay, let's circle back round. My first killer question to you is: does your design system need a name?
Oh God, I don't know if I have a strong opinion about it, honestly. Which is very strange, isn't it? To say I don't mind them having a name, and I don't mind them not having a name, really, or just a descriptive name, like company, organization name, design system. I think that's absolutely fine. And I also think it's okay to give your design system an internal name if you want to. I think the thing that makes me laugh is the specific names that people choose to call their design systems. There's that joke, which I did a pub quiz question based on once, which is like that it's very hard to distinguish between design system names and names of apprentice teams, as in teams on The Apprentice. So I just did a whole like quick lightning round in a quiz once where it was like, is this a design system or a team on The Apprentice? When you think about it, it's like solar. What's the Spotify one called? Encore.
Yeah,
What are
I
some of
think
the
it's
other ones?
Encore.
Lightning. They all
You're
sound.
getting ahead of yourself. I've got a
Wait,
quiz for you later.
oh, great! I'm excited.
I guess there's two schools of thought, kind of one way or the other. I had a bit of a rummage through the internet. Brad Frost, of course, has a post on his blog about naming your design system with an
What's the?
actual name. He suggests a design system name is good because it mitigates confusion. Many organizations have different permutations and generations of design systems floating around. So I can kind of see the value there. Like where I am at Just Eat, the design system is called Pi. The legacy system has a different name. So saying something's from Pi means, it's tested, of good quality, accessibility checked, that sort of thing. So that kind of makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Creating a global namespace, so having a distinct global namespace for a design system. So this obviously prevents collisions with non-design system code. It's a useful web component namespace. All of this sounds like a kind of very engineering-centric take.
Mm.
He also says it helps with branding and marketing efforts. How do you feel about that? He alludes to stickers and swag.
Stickers and swag. I mean, you can do some pretty cool marketing without a name. I think we did some quite cool stickers and merch for the GovUK design system, and that was just called the GovUK design system. So, but I take your point, Brad. I take your point.
There's a lot of design systems without a name. Morgan Peng from Societe Generale gave a talk at it was Zero Heights Manchester Converge on how their design system doesn't have a name or a brand and how that's working for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the talk, she actually suggested giving the system a separate identity can bring kind of almost exclusion and make it feel like the system's not serving the company that it's built for. Have you got a take on that?
Oh, I really don't know. I mean, I think it's one of the things I think it depends on is how mature the kind of design, developer, and product practices are at your organization. Because if they're pretty mature and you're hiring quite experienced people, the chances are by now they've already had some sort of interaction with the design system. And so using the name design system in that instance, for better or for worse, will probably give them some preconceptions about what it is and might help them to trust it or not trust it. I think that giving it a separate name leaves everybody kind of in the dark in some respects. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, really. What do you think?
I guess the further I go down the path in design systems, the less likely I am to give a design system its own name.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest regrets we had on the Lloyd's design system is we called it Constellation because it, I don't know, sounded cool. Lloyd's is a company that started in I don't know, it's like 1765. It's got loads of history. You can go and visit the archives up in Edinburgh, and it's done loads of cool stuff. Like it had the first woman bank teller and obviously the iconic horse. And it owned brands like Halifax with Howard, who gave you extra on the ads. And
Oh,
I,
Howard. I
yeah,
remember
I,
Howard.
I, I feel like we should have sort of ripped off its history and given it a horse name like, I don't know, Gymkhana or Wild Stallion or something.
Stallion. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Stallion.
Yeah.
We ended up with this design system that had a totally separate brand and brand identity. And we got feedback that people thought Constellation was like an external agency or something separate to Lloyd. So
Well,
the kind of
interesting. Yeah.
exclusion thing, I can see where Morgana's coming from with that.
I think what I actually think is that we're probably asking the name to do quite a lot, and you know, whether or not you give your design system a name is probably not going to make or break it. I think it's much more about how you kind of operate, how you communicate. We know with design systems that over communication is such an important part of engagement and adoption and trust. And so I think that if you don't do those things, you know, name's not going to bridge that gap for you. And if you do those things, then people probably be quite forgiving of whatever you decide to call it.
If we've decided we do want a design systems name, how do you go about choosing the name? That's the difficult thing. I mean, like I said, it should ideally represent your brand's identity, principles, and values. But, you know, if you're going to name your design system, how do you go about it? Like, are you democratic? Do you brainstorm ideas as a team and give your consumers a vote? Do you let anyone decide? Do you make a decision within the team and announce it? How would you go about it?
I think some kind of shortlist, contained shortlisting process, perhaps within the design system team, and then some kind of democratic vote is a nice way of doing it. Because I think the earlier that you can start to involve people in the process of creating your design system, including what you call it, the better. Really, it's I think most people want design systems to feel like a community effort. Even people who have quite centralized governance and maintenance models, I think, want it to feel like something for the whole company by the whole company. So yeah, I reckon I'd do a little name storm, create a shortlist, and then put it out to vote.
Okay. I feel like giving the sort of general consumers a vote can be very problematic. You can end up with Brexit or Boaty McBoatface.
Boaty McBoatface design system face. Bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Yes, you can, but then I think but that's where confidence in your shortlist comes in. I think don't put anything on the shortlist that you wouldn't be happy to have as your name.
That's very sensible. If you're outside of the UK and you haven't heard of Boaty McBoatface, it was a British government agency who let the internet suggest a name for a £200 million polar research ship. And they had 32,000 boat names submitted. And there were names like, I like big boats and I cannot lie. Obviously, the name that ended up winning the public vote was Boaty McBoatface. And, everyone agreed this was too stupid and they just called the boat Sir David Attenborough, which they should have just done in the first place.
A funny little anecdote there is that we did the same. We didn't learn from our mistakes. So when I worked for the UK government, we decided to put out a vote for what we should call our new boardroom in our building, and the winning entry was Boardy McBoardface. So his lessons were not learned by the UK government. That's probably not something I'm supposed to disclose, but never mind. I think it was renamed. I think it got named after some digital pioneer or something in the end.
That's so sucky, though. If your company votes the design system should be called like Typey McTypeface, don't you think you're obliged to use it?
Typey McTypeface is funny as well because typeface is a thing. So that works really well, I think. Pun intended.
Yeah, you can have that one, listeners.
Typey McTypeface. Yeah.
Obviously, whenever I'm naming anything, I always do a robust Google check and look on the Urban Dictionary to make sure it doesn't mean anything rude or inappropriate on the street or in another language. Classic example is that American keyboard called knob that's been doing the rounds on Twitter. Obviously, knob has a very different meaning in the UK to the US.
Yes, indeed it does. If you're from the UK, enjoy that reference. If you're from the US, enjoy your blissful ignorance and don't Google it.
No, best not to. Obviously, another consideration might be legal or brand approval. If you plan to open source and your name is going wider than an internal audience, then it's worth running it past legal and compliance to check you're actually allowed to use it. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to end our getting to know you session with a surprise pop quiz, Amy, on design systems names.
Oh,
Okay.
Jerry.
I'm going to read them out and you've got to tell me what company they come from. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, easy ones. Carbon,
IBM.
Lightning,
Salesforce.
Spectrum,
Adobe.
Backpack,
Knapsack. No.
Sky
Sky
Scanner.
Scanner. I did know that as well.
Material, that's an easy one.
Google.
Okay, so they're the easy ones. I've got some difficult ones.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Luna.
Oh God, I know Luna. Oh my God. Don't know, can't remember.
Sainsbury's.
Yes, I knew
Very
that.
UK centric. Seeds.
Seeds is I know this as well and I can't remember. Is it Sprout Social?
It is. Well
Yes.
done. Okay, getting more difficult. Base.
Can't remember.
Uber.
Yeah.
Gestalt.
Is oh God, this was entered into like every category in the Design System Awards and I can't remember. Can I? Pinterest.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is the last
I'm
one.
so happy.
This is going through to your overall end of term score, so you're nailing it, Hugh.
God.
This is
Okay.
my favourite design systems name, Hawkins.
Hawkins.
Yeah.
Spell it for me.
Hawkins.
Oh my God, I heard something completely different.
Okay. Hawkins, my New Zealand accent.
No, sorry. Hawkins, I've got no idea. I've never heard of Hawkins.
It's Netflix design system named after the fictional town of Hawkins in Stranger Things, which I just think is such a lovely little. Yeah, love it.
That's cute. Irrelevant as a design system name, but sweet.
Yeah, like it's my favourite.
Yeah.
Okay, you're off the hook. That's your
Thank
naming
you.
test done. So now we have an industry name and we have a design systems name. What we need is some taxonomy names to argue over endlessly. So we're going to move to a short geography lesson. I've called this Mapping the Landscape of Your Design System Elements.
Yes.
Okay, so in episode 2, we did a deep dive into the history of componentizing web design, and we spoke briefly about the different naming of sort of groups of components and design systems. Obviously, one of the largest influences on naming the chunks of components is Brad Frost's atomic design methodology, which we're obviously all familiar with, riffs off the science metaphors. I know people get very angry with Brad because the science metaphors aren't consistent. Like they go atoms, molecules, organisms, pages,
Give up.
templates.
Atoms, molecules, organisms.
Yeah.
I've run out of stuff.
But actually, on stage at Zero Heights Converge conference in San Francisco, Brad was shouting, "I don't care what you name the groups," which is very funny. Do you think there is value in naming these groupings of components?
I think there's value in naming categories of things in your design system. I don't know that I would name kind of groups of components. Is that what you mean? Or you mean just the things, just the items in a design system?
What is an atom? What is a molecule? What is an organism? Like, should we actually care? I feel like I've been in systems teams where everyone's arguing over whether something should be a something. And then it's like, does it really matter about these names?
I mean, I think it matters, but I think what you have to kind of acknowledge is you're never going to get 100% consensus on it. So just kind of get as close as you can and then use that grouping consistently. I do think, Brad won't care about my opinion whatsoever. And I think that his model is a really useful way of kind of conceptualizing what goes into design systems and introducing that idea of components and subcomponents and these different sized parts. But I do think that as a way of actually naming the stuff in your design system, it's not really that helpful. I think you have to be familiar with design systems, with Brad Frost, with the atomic model, which, some of us are, some of us are not. And I think that, having to, the number of times I've had to sit in meetings and explain the atomic model to stakeholders who just don't care, is horrendous.
Yeah. Why would you care outside of systems?
Why would you?
There are some systems which have put their own spin on these metaphors. Yelp's design system called Cookbook, it goes ingredients, recipes, entrees, pages and templates. I'm just so bummed they didn't see this through and use like dinner and all you could eat buffet or something at the end, or that frustrated me. But
we had no
very
experience
similar to
recently.
Brad's.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to mention our all-you-can-eat excursion. It was fun, wasn't it? We had
it was. Yeah, that's such a great idea. Yeah.
Such a great idea of Scott Riley's, and hats off to Scott for an absolutely stellar performance on the deep fried crispy chicken wings.
Yeah, I've never seen anyone put away so much chicken before. He's an absolute legend of a man.
Legend, yeah.
Okay, we digress. So
We do.
We've got a name. We've got an overriding structure. Let's move on to a biology lesson.
Oh.
So dictionary.com describes biology as this. Whoa, I felt like that was a massive introduction.
Sorry, there's some sort of fanfare going on outside my window. I think it's stopped now. This is what happens when you don't record in an actual studio, but we haven't been given I don't think we've proved our worth enough to warrant a studio yet, have we? So,
I don't think
sorry about that street action going on, but
I think people are just excited about biology and my dictionary.com definition.
I think they probably are. Yeah, someone racing to my house to break in and
save you from the boredom of me doing this. Okay, come on. This is the dictionary.com definition of biology: a study of living organisms divided into many specialized fields that cover their anatomy, behavior, origin, and distribution. I mean, if that wasn't a description of naming your design system components, then you can, I don't know, sack me as departmental science head teacher. Okay,
I won't do that.
I don't know about you, but I found naming components one of the most frustrating things about design systems. Deciding on names is essential so designers and engineers speak the same language, but deciding on that language can get very time consuming and sometimes political. You kind of start off by thinking, how hard can it be? Like, with HTML, we already have most core elements and primitives in place to make a web interface. And these things already have names. But with more complex components, your molecules and organisms, it's possible to call components lots of different names. So my first question to you is, what do you think makes a good component name?
I think that, as you sort of alluded to there, I think where there is an HTML name, use that. The amount of resistance I've encountered over the years to doing that, and wanting to give things these kind of whimsical names, just call them the HTML name. It really helps with wayfinding massively. In terms of bigger things, I think be as descriptive as possible is my advice. So it's hard. Obviously, we're not dealing with necessarily real things, and these things don't always have a kind of an obvious, I don't know, we have to sometimes make something up. But I think that where you can be descriptive and kind of say what it does, that's helpful. But it can be tricky. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because some of the things that we are talking about here, I think, when we say like big components that are made up of smaller components at GDS, we often categorize those things as design patterns, and that's a interesting kind of blurred line there. So I think I don't really know what point I'm making, but it goes to show, doesn't it? Be descriptive. That's my advice. What's yours?
Be descriptive. I like it. We could just boil it down to that one soundbite. Just to circle back around to so you had components and patterns.
Yes.
As the lady who wrote the content, what was the differentiating factor between a component and a pattern?
So a component we saw as kind of indivisible things, really. When I say indivisible, I suppose they are still made up of sub components like labels and inputs and things like that, but something that kind of mapped to the level of an individual HTML element. A pattern was usually something bigger, and we actually sort of had two categories as patterns, which internally we talked about as kind of behavioral patterns and object patterns. So behavioral patterns would be the kind of steps and the components and the standards that you should follow when you're trying to help a user complete a task or action. So we used to have ask users for was one category of pattern, and help users to was another category of pattern. So ask users for would be like ask users for names, addresses, gender and sex, race and ethnicity, all of those things. Help users to would be help users to check their answers, help users to submit their application or something like that. And then we'd have these object patterns, which we just kind of unimaginatively called pages in the end. And there was a lot of arguments about that. But for us, most of the time it mapped to a page in the WK kind of ecosystem. So it'd be like check your answers or task list or form page or something like that, if that makes sense.
I guess the nice thing about GDS, your sort of whole thing with forms was asking one thing per page.
Right,
So,
yeah.
you
So
would
for
have
us, those things do often map to an individual page, whereas I guess for other
yeah.
organizations, they might not so neatly.
Yeah, it's a really nice way of cutting through it, though. I haven't thought of it that way. I'm going to have to go back and have a rummage through your patterns. I've done that for a while.
Oh, I haven't done that for a while. I've been wondering when you're going to rummage my patterns again. Anyway, cut that from the perhaps cut that from the
moving along.
Yeah.
So I got out the Design Systems Handbook by Alla Kolmatova, which I haven't looked at for ages.
It's amazing.
Still stands up after
Still
all these years as being the most cracking design systems book. Anyway,
sorry, I was just going to interject very quickly and say to this day, when people ask me for stuff they should read if they want to get more knowledgeable about design systems, I think it's such a good start point. Like, I think everybody should read it because, like you say, it does still hold up. It's aged really well, I think.
I think it's kind of generic enough that it's aged well. It's not kind of really technical specific. Sometimes if you get something that's like a technical guide, then technology moves on, then it's kind of out of date. But it's got some very good general principles in it. Anyway, it's got an excellent section on naming components with this advice. So let's talk through it. Good names communicate the purpose. That's exactly what you've just said with the GDS model. Good names are based on metaphors. It gives people real world examples to draw from. Her example is a spotlight component that draws attention. So based on metaphors. Any thoughts on that?
I think that can be a helpful place to start. If we're thinking about kind of being descriptive with names, if we don't have an HTML equivalent to kind of lean on, then I actually do think that's quite a nice way. If you can be if the metaphor is relatively close to the thing that it does online, if that makes sense, if the real world example is close to what it does online, I think, yeah,
it's a kind of I guess for me, anything based on a metaphor, it's whether or not people get the metaphor or whether that translates languages anyway, moving on. Avoid names that are too presentational. You need to keep a level of abstraction. She said, once you name an object, you shape its future, which I very much agree with. Her example of a presentational name is like calling something a pink button, because then it can only be pink, whereas a button could be any color. So that I'm totally on board with that. And this is an interesting one. Good names have a personality because they're easy to remember. What do you think about that?
No, Ali, you've lost me there. Honestly, I think this is us drinking our own Kool-Aid too much. I just think it's, we think things are easy to remember if we make them kind of whimsical and funny in design systems, but most people are just trying to really, I would say, ignore the system as much as possible. I just want to do their job, and the less the system can kind of get in your way, and if it can kind of reduce your cognitive load, it should do that, I think. So I think often when we think we're being kind of a bit edgy and funny and trying to get people to remember things that way, it's just causing more hassle than it's worth. That's my view. That's my very miserable view. Sorry, that's very Scroogey of me. I love and respect Alla so much, but that's my experience, I think.
Okay, I've got a hot take for you then.
Oh, all
It's
right.
so hot, you might need to put your science class safety goggles on for this one,
Oh
following
my
that comment.
goodness.
Okay, so Dan Moore gave a talk at Zero Heights Converge conference in London in 2022 called Your Next Component. And he talked about a project where they had a carousel component where they couldn't agree on a name, so they called it Fred. In his talk, he said, "It doesn't matter what you agree on, it only matters that you agree." How do you feel about calling a component Fred?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologise for the eye roll that I just issued when you brought that up, because I really have so much respect for Dan and I love his talks. And I saw that talk and I really, really enjoyed it. So I just want to make that very clear before I say that on this occasion, I absolutely disagree. So I actually did a spicy hot slide about that very point that he made
Ah,
in one of my talks, where in fact, it wasn't a talk, it's some training that I run on writing design systems documentation. And I made it ludicrous by kind of scaling it so I showed a list of design system components in a kind of mocked up doc site where they were all given human names. So it was just like Alice, Ben, Fred, Chris, Dave. I'm not doing this alphabetical order anymore. And I was like, how much would you enjoy trying to find stuff in this design system? And everybody rolls their eyes. And I'm like, that's why it seems funny and cute at the time, but it doesn't scale. It's annoying. I think if you've got a literal marketing team behind your design system who's able to go out and kind of really get this into everybody's face and hammer it into their brain so that they remember it, could work really well, could be funny. I think in reality, if you're talking about a big organization, like, in Gov UK, for example, we didn't have contact with most of the teams using the design system. We'd never even meet them. So we called a component Fred, what's his face over in DEFRA is going to have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. I think it's the same point I was making about Ala's suggestion of kind of personality names. I just think, nah, not for me. What do you think?
I obviously respect Dan as a design systems expert, and I imagine what he did on the project was the right thing at the time. But I found another article actually on Medium, which kind of, I guess it sums up my thinking on it. It was by Kat Allen about naming components in the Dropbox design system, and I liked the simplicity of headings on this one. It focused on naming being intuitive, so simple and clear, whilst offering guidance, consistent, following the same structure and labeling, and scalable, maintaining broad naming structures, and flexible labels. So the kind of intuitive, consistent, scalable thing for me, that kind of trumps anything fun or whimsical. Just as you say, from a user perspective, you're not necessarily going to be talking to the people using these things.
No, I think so. I think, yeah, in summary, I'd say I think if there's a precedent, use that. If there isn't a precedent, use the most descriptive name that you can, and only then turn to Fred as a naming convention. I've had a couple of funny comments in the chat from Fiona saying that she once called one Rudolph or Pimple, which I'm interested in the alias decision there. And she said people thought she was childish. Just a bit of fun though. Hot take, fun doesn't exist in large organizations. No, it doesn't really. I'd agree with that. I think it does. I think it's like when we get kind of, I do feel like a bit of a spoilsport when I have these conversations, I must say. But I think it's that when we're actually I think with design systems, sometimes we can get overly excited about design systems and we can really kind of forget that everybody isn't necessarily as passionate and excited about them as we are. What we're actually trying to do is give people tools to use to assist their work, which is quite a boring thing when you think about it, really. So make it kind of simple and boring. And sorry for being boring about that. She did also mention Louis Oriash, who's one of the Figma designer advocates, who's disco_Lou on X and various places online, I think, used to do, I don't know if still does, this name this component game where he'd share a picture of a component once a week and a kind of description of what it does and say, what would you call this? And it was just hilarious to go in and look at the arguments that ensued in the threads afterwards. So go and have a look back at some of those if you can, if you're on X anymore. Are you on X anymore, Geri?
Of course.
Yeah,
It might be a bin fire, but it's my bin fire.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Elon's been
Um,
fine now, but
it is,
mm.
sadly. Yeah, so obviously with loads of different people feeding into these things, what have you done if the various specialisms and people can't agree on a name? You know, is there anything you've actually done as a team to try and figure out what the name should be?
Oh, I'm remembering this incredibly painful conversation about a component called the summary list, which exists in the GovUK design system. And I think it got named and renamed about 100 times. And I think in the end, I think we had sort of two options, and we used to have a kind of a working group of designers and developers who would assess contributions and whether they were ready or not and give us feedback. And I think in the end, we put the decision to them, and we said, what do you know, which of these two names do you think we should call it? And no, we're not going back to the drawing board again. Because so I think sometimes, I think it's part of it is almost accepting sometimes. If you really can't think of an intuitive name, you're really struggling to make your mind up, it might be because there just isn't a very good name for the thing. You know, sometimes it's an indicator that you haven't scoped it properly and that actually like you don't really know what it is. But sometimes it's just like it's quite clear what it is, but it's just we don't have a precedent, we don't have something that descriptive. And I come back to what I said earlier. Sometimes I think we ask too much from the names of things. Like we need to do our best, but sometimes a name alone is just not going to be enough to convey the purpose and the meaning. And you're going to have to supplement that with a good component description.
Interesting. I've had a when I was at BPP, I inherited these components called radio cards, and that was like a really sticky one because it was a card component with a radio button inside. So, like the whole card became a clickable selector.
Right.
With my accessibility hat on, you know, I did make the radio button visible by default, but I still had an issue with these things because they appeared as something they weren't semantically. You know, they were a choice. They were like a radio button selection, not a card.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, you know, the issue here is kind of purpose and usage versus underlying semantics.
Yeah.
Um, and yes,
Material honesty, I think, is what you're talking about there. Right. No, but it's
uh,
like Jeremy Keith talks about this a lot about the importance of kind of material honesty. And I think that kind of almost makes me think about, you know, the whole link styled as buttons and button styled as links argument is kind of make it look and work like what it is and call it what it is as well. Because it gives, yeah, it's misleading, isn't it? I think.
yeah, I think the most ambiguous components are popover things, you know, like
Oh,
modals and dialogues and poppers and toasts and tooltips. You know, I think the problem is visually they appear to do similar things. You know, they're a thing that overlays the screen, but in terms of roles and accessibility semantics, they're all different, especially their roles for assistive tech like screen readers. You know, for me, taking the component back to the HTML anatomy, you know, what's it made from, then defining the purpose and the usage is so important.
mm,
Yeah, often things can look the same, but they're not actually the same under the hood. And I guess that's where I always, my inner web standards enthusiast comes out and I get all huffy about these things.
yeah, yeah. And I think that sometimes that's easy for some of us to overlook as well, because you mentioned accessibility there. Something that might look similar to us as and function in a similar way to us as, you know, sighted people, people without visual impairments. You know, I think it may actually work and present very differently to somebody using, for example, a screen reader. So I think that that's something that we have to be kind of mindful of when we, so, you know, I've heard people be sometimes quite dismissive about like, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's basically the same thing. It's like, it is for you, but it won't be for everybody. So yeah. But it's just on the note of popovers, I just want to mention at this point the fantastic talk, which I think will be going online at some point, by Hida at the very recent All Day Hay, which we were both at last week, where we had the all you can eat tie, which was all about popovers. And it was a brilliant talk. It really broke down the difference between popovers and modals and overlays and things that I didn't necessarily understand. And I'll say, like, as somebody who's very much not a developer and without a kind of technical background, it was a really sort of penetrable talk. Like I understood it, you know, I managed to kind of make sense of it. I think I understand now what the difference is and stuff. So check that out if you are interested in popovers and such things.
We also learnt during that talk, in America, popovers are Yorkshire puddings.
Yeah, I was disgusted by that
Yeah, so was
information.
I. I
Yeah.
know, the horrors of that. A popover. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the world coming to?
Popovers are hard, apparently. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think we've got through component namings,
Mm-hmm.
but we're continuing with our science class. We're getting out the microscopes and we're going even more granular on components to look at categorizing and scaling within those components, which informs our component properties or props.
Wowzers.
Once we've got the component names in order, then we have another layer of naming to consider. I'm calling this section microbiology. You can tell I know a lot about science. So let's start with
Hard
size.
same, Geri. Hard same.
Chirissa in the chat's just said, do we have a link to the popover conversation? It was, what's the name of the conference, Amy? I get it wrong every time.
The conference
All-
is all day hay, and it's in Leeds. It's run by Josh Nesbitt at Stack. I'll pop it in the chat. The talks haven't been published for this year yet. I'm not sure exactly when they come out. I guess it'll be sometime in the next couple of months. So just keep an eye on that. If you search hashtag all day hay on X or Mastodon, you should find related tweets, or hashtag hey all day from Geri, who despite hang on, you spoke. No, you didn't speak at this one.
No, I didn't speak at this one. I have such an issue with the name of this conference. If you search the hashtag hey all day, there's one tweet from me. I just can't get it. It just doesn't work in my brain.
In fairness to you, I mocked you for this a few times. I was like, why can't you remember it, Geri? But then in all of these slides that they did in between talks, they had the hey logo, because hey is the kind of the brand, isn't it, of the conference? And they had the logo before the words all day. So it did actually read on all of the slides as hey all day. So sorry, folks at All Day Hey, you are fantastic people, but you are being misleading with your slides there. Sorry, Josh.
Okay, let's circle back around to microbiology class, Amy. I feel like, you might get a detention for slacking off. So let's start with size. How do you name sizes in a design system?
I don't know. I think descriptive sizes, or what is I think kind of I don't know. I'm not very good at naming sizes and things. I think you need to think about the points on your scale there. Like, I think I've worked in teams before where we've chosen like what was it that we did? But we did something like SML, I think, like t-shirt sizing, and then suddenly discovered that we had too many increments to cater to all of the different sizing points that we needed. So think about how your sizing system will scale, I guess. I'm definitely not an expert in this. I don't know if that's coming across. How do you do it?
Yeah, see, the problem with t-shirt sizing is, what if you end up with a size in between? So if you have something between medium and large, what do you call it? If you have a numeric sizing scale, like a 10 to 100, you can at least squeak in some really snide, like 95 or 85 or something, if you really have to, because you never know how your system will change and evolve. You might need a value in between the two values. There were some systems, or are some systems, that give a further abstraction to names. The most memorable one was Bulb's solar design system, which was based on animals. It went from like snail to whale.
Wow.
I kind of liked it, but then, as a capybara larger than a badger, for example, you have to know how big an actual physical animal is, and I don't know if everybody does know that.
Thank you for mentioning capybaras again. I mean, I think you're right. It's easy to see how that falls down when your knowledge of the animal kingdom falls down, which mine would, I think, very quickly.
Oh, yeah, I guess you've got to think about scale. Typography is another one in systems where naming goes wild. Have you, I mean, as a content person, have you had any input into type categorization, or did you leave that to the real designers?
I left that to the real design. It's very funny. You've just offended the entire content design community there. Typically, no, I've not had much involvement in that. I think that, we have typically tried to think about the kind of purpose of the whatever it is, what am I trying to say, Geri? I can't do my words. I mentioned before we started the official recording that I have labyrinthitis right now, which is an inner ear infection. It's making me very spacey, but I'm trying to say the different points again on the scale, I suppose. So like semantic. Oh no, anyway, sorry, I wanted to say something, but I'm going to take us off on a 20-minute tangent, so I'm not going to say it. You go, you tell me what you know about it, Geri.
I guess I've worked on a lot of type scales on systems. IBM Carbon names type scales into two groupings. They have like productive type for your utility UI, things like forms and buttons with a functional usage. And then they've got an expressive range of type for like more impactful applications like heroes and marketing. Kind of like that because it helps inform your token names and specifies usage. Within this, you have kind of category buckets. You might have display type or heading or body. I guess we could probably do an entire podcast episode, and I look like I've lost you here, so I might move on.
No, you've not lost me. You've not lost me. That's actually my concentration phase. Do you know, fun fact, all of my school reports used to say, Amy is a good student, she gets good grades and everything, but she's always away with the fairies. And I was like, I don't know how to convey to my teachers at the age of 6 that I just have kind of resting bored face. Like I look like I'm miles away when I'm concentrating. And then when I'm actually not concentrating, I tend to focus on making my face look very engaged, while I kind of, the rabbits running the hamster wheel in my brain go to town on something else. So no, you didn't lose me.
Oh, good. I tend to just look miserable all the time. My kind of resting UX face is a fairly miserable one. Anyway, if you are new or confused by naming type in design systems, Nathan Curtis has a solid piece of pillar content published way back in 2019 called Typography in Design Systems, which still stands up as the defining explainer for me in terms of naming. I feel like we could just rename the show the Nathan Curtis Appreciation Podcast.
Absolutely.
You, Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan. Once again.
More practical examples. Figma's actually got a post on naming and design systems, which is very good on type names with some links out. It's on their site, designsystems.com. Anyway, I think we're done with naming components. You'll be excited to hear we are ending school today by going on a field trip.
Oh, okay.
Because our science department has been woefully underfunded by the Tories, we don't get a humanities field trip to the art gallery that we actually want to go to.
Oh, for goodness sake.
It's all about maths and science, baby. We're cancelling the arts.
The Tories. They've really messed this one up. After an absolutely impeccable track record, this will definitely get cut, won't it? It's fine.
We're joining the physics student on a trip to the Large Hadron Collider to search for particles. Physicists working on the Large Hadron Collider at CERN are studying elementary particles to increase our understanding of matter and the origins of the universe. Now, I appreciate the work we do in design systems as rectangle draggers doesn't quite contribute to the advancement of humanity to the same level, but if we reduce our work down to the particle level, think particles, very small elements of the universe, I have a final question for you. Should designers name their layers in Figma?
Oh my God, Geri. My God. The setup for that. Yeah, probably. I don't have a strong opinion on it. As you pointed out, I'm not a real designer, so I don't really use Figma. Yeah, I think so. Why wouldn't you? There's such a debate about this, but I'm like, why is it contentious? Yeah, name it.
It causes such rifts in the design community. I mean, I guess for me, it depends what the Figma file is being used for. If it's part of a technical spec that engineers are using to build a component for the design system, then it should have consistent naming conventions. But if it's just being used to make prototypes, I don't think naming your layers is that important. I'll probably get cancelled on X for saying that.
Yes, sorry, I am absolutely answering that question only in the context of design systems. And so I'm thinking about files that are being, like either, the system itself or files that are being handed over to developers with the intention of specking that, giving them the spec. Yeah. Obviously, yeah. I don't care. I do care.
Oh,
It's
you
very
do care,
important.
really?
I do
Okay.
care.
I think that ends our lesson today, Amy. I think it's about time for you to go and lay down somewhere outside in the playground. But
We're all
before
a bit hot and bothered, aren't we, today?
it's really warm
Woo!
today.
It is.
Before we go, we have our end of term pop quiz. It's not end of term, end of
No, it
lesson
isn't.
pop
End of
quiz.
lesson.
I'll
Okay.
make it quick. We've got 2 minutes. You get
All right.
3 mystery questions plus 1 bonus question on capybaras. Are you ready?
I am.
So, which company produces the Hawkins design system?
Netflix.
Woohoo! Name one design system that doesn't have a name that's not GDS.
SocGen, Society
Yes, right,
Generale.
you were listening.
I was.
What was the contentious name of Dan Moll's carousel component?
Fred. Same name as my nephew. Shout out, Fred.
Oh,
Auntie Amy loves you.
I haven't actually listened to that talk since I saw it live, and I remembered the component being called Dave, so I was searching Dan Moll Dave component and nothing was
Oh,
coming up. I think I've just worked with so many Daves.
yeah,
Okay,
same.
well done. 3 out of 3. Last
Thank
question on
you.
capybaras. This is a tough one. Who weighs more, me or a large adult lady capybara?
Oh my God.
For transparency, I weigh about 60 kilos.
Oh, Geri, that's very transparent. Don't know. I'm gonna say you. I can't imagine them being as big as a human.
An adult capybara can weigh as much as an adult human, reaching weights of up to 70 kilos.
Oh my
That's like
goodness.
11 stone, or in US terms, 154 pounds. That is a
Truly
big
ginormous
old
monsters,
rodent.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's a fair old size to get to just by eating leaves and your own poo.
Your own too, yeah. As we learnt last
Oh.
time.
Oh, yeah, just for a bit of context. Okay, we're at the end of the lesson. Congratulations for making it all the way through this one, Amy Hupe. I think I'm going to give you an A- for effort just because it's so warm today and you did a sterling job.
Just because it's so warm today. Thank you. That's absolutely fair. Yeah.
Do I get a mark as the teacher?
You do get a mark. I thought you did a very thorough job today, Geri. So I'm going to give you your very first since we began the series, I think, A.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
I think you really, I feel like you carried today. So I'm giving you an A as a olive branch.
A huge thank you to Zero Height for having us and for Kat for moderating and setting up today. If they let us come back, we are talking about models of design systems next month.